Hello, and welcome to tonight's call with Congressman Adam Smith. During tonight's call, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 now. You may also sign up for our newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time during this call. Again, please press star 3 to ask a question live and star 6 to subscribe to our e-newsletter. With that, I now turn it over to Congressman Adam Smith.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate everybody joining today. It's my second Teletown Hall of the week. I'm trying to do these more often, quite frankly, because there is so much going on with the federal government to be concerned about. We're hearing, high volumes from my constituents, concerns about a variety of different issues. So I want to make sure we're accessible, trying to address those as often and as frequently as possible, because I'm deeply, deeply concerned about what President Trump is doing in the country right now and what he's doing to the federal government. And I don't say that to be partisan. I say that because Donald Trump is attempting to exercise a level of control over the federal government that's really unprecedented. And it is my honest, heartfelt opinion that this is jeopardizing our representative democracy and the normal system of checks and balances that make sure that laws are upheld and that people have a voice in their government. Trump is moving to consolidate power, and that's the biggest thing that concerns me. There's a lot of talk about government efficiency and effectiveness, but most of the moves during his first month plus in office have really been more about trying to instill loyalty and control. And I think he's doing great damage to our federal government. You've heard about, thousands, tens of thousands of federal employees now being fired. A large number of programs that had already been authorized have been blocked. Funding, both for overseas foreign aid programs, but also for a variety of domestic programs, have been blocked that had been approved by Congress and signed by the president. And that's a violation of the law. We should have a robust debate every year about what should we spend money on? What should the taxes and spending be? How can we handle the deficit? But for a president to come in and override Congress is to violate the Constitution, to violate the separation of powers, and crucially, understand why those things are in place. Because we didn't want any one person to have absolute control. We wanted to make sure that all people had a voice. Well, Trump is trying to smash that. And I'm also deeply concerned that this is really undermining the effectiveness of our federal government. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. He's laid off some, I forget the numbers, I think it's like 1,600 FAA workers. They were already understaffed. We were already concerned about the number of near misses that had happened across the country. And now we're whacking away, another 1,600 employees. It's going to undermine that. They let go 300 out of 1,800 employees in charge of protecting our nuclear weapons stockpile before belatedly realizing that that was dangerous. And now they're desperately trying to get those people back. So it's happening in a very roughshod manner that seems more designed to smash the ability of our federal workforce than it does to make them more efficient or more effective. I'll give you one other fact on that. A lot of the employees who are being fired are probationary employees. So these are people who have been there less than 2 years. I've seen no effort in any of these firings to measure, whether or not these people are good at their jobs, whether or not they're performing. He's just firing as many people as possible. So that's the large number. And then you've got the firing of C.Q. Brown, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I've worked closely with now for probably about 6 years, from his time as being chief of staff to the Air Force to the last 2 years as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is an incredibly competent, capable, and smart person. And nobody I saw argued otherwise. Trump just wants to make sure that whoever is in a position of power is loyal to Trump first. And that really undermines the effectiveness of our government. Right now, all across the federal government, people are thinking, my gosh, if I say anything critical of Trump, if I don't show loyalty to Trump, I'm going to lose my job. Well, that's going to undermine their ability to do their job well. I would welcome an opportunity to try to make our federal government more efficient and more effective. I've been working on this in the Pentagon for a number of years, trying to force forward the audit, which they are making some progress on. Trying to get after the requirements process that is so cumbersome that it takes years and in some cases decades to field some, military programs. There's a lot of reform we can do. Right now, all that's being done is a large number of people are being fired. The federal workforce is also being, as I mentioned, terrorized. I mean, they're frequently getting notices about how they're going to be fired. One just went out, I think about 12 hours ago, saying basically, they have 24 hours to respond to an email. I think it was explaining 5 things that they did this week. If they don't respond to that email, they will be considered terminated. Okay. Well, what does that mean? So it is really disrupting the ability of the federal workforce to be any kind of effective body. And I will point out that for 40 years now, the federal workforce has stayed flat. We haven't actually had a huge growth in the number of federal employees. And I'm not talking about as adjusted for inflation or as adjusted for the population, in real numbers. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of inefficiencies within our federal government. It doesn't have much to do with them hiring too many people. And yet that's what Trump and Musk are going after. So I'm really concerned about that. Now, logical question is, what do we do about it? One of the things that has been done, a lot of lawsuits have been filed, and many of those lawsuits have been successful, blocking Trump's efforts to fire a variety of people. That's the other group of people they've fired. They've fired inspector generals. They fired the head of the ethics, I forget the name of it, ethics organization. They've tried to fire people who are supposed to be independent of the executive branch to exercise oversight of that executive branch. They're trying to get rid of those independent actors, again, because they want to make sure that everybody is loyal. At the end of the day, my conclusion from watching what Trump and Musk have done for the last 30 days, they want to create a situation where they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, without any check on that power. And that is against the concept of our representative democracy, and it's against our Constitution. Now, again, we could absolutely reform government to make it more efficient and more effective, but that's not what Trump and Musk are doing right now. They're simply trying to take power wherever they can get it and reduce the number of checks on that power. I don't think that's in the best interests of the country. Now, I know a lot of people also frustrated, people who don't agree with what Trump's doing. How do we stop it? One of the big things, the lawsuits do matter. They have forced some of these decisions to be reversed, but also I think public pressure matters. I think you've probably seen in the last few days some town hall meetings that Republicans have had where people showed up really angry with pointed questions about what all of this meant. And that pressure does help move the needle towards blocking some of the more egregious actions that President Trump is taking. And that's really what we need. We need more members of Congress who oppose what Trump is doing. That means we got to start persuading Republicans. And I know a lot of them are concerned about it. I spoke with a Republican colleague of mine from Florida about the cutoff to USAID. And, people were saying, well, they're just auditing USAID. Well, they're not auditing it. They shut it down. They shut down programs and they fired thousands of employees and shuttered the office. I said, well, I know I don't support that, but he's not doing anything about it. More voices from more people can begin to persuade them to move in a different direction on that. I also think it's really important to have a positive agenda to talk about some of the issues and items that we need to work on. And to me, the biggest problem in our country, as I've said many times in this forum, is the concentration of wealth. There just isn't enough opportunity. You have roughly 60% of the American people who are struggling on a day in and day out basis to pay the bills, while a small number of people have an unimaginable amount of wealth. And there's all kinds of statistics that show this, but the amount of wealth held in the hands of the top 10%, the top 1%, the top 0.01% has increased astronomically over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, while the people, the wage earners at the bottom end, are struggling to keep up. A couple ideas that we've floated. I've always been a big supporter of the minimum wage. CTAC had the first in the nation $15 minimum wage. We've had a couple of other minimum wage initiatives around here in the local area that have passed. There's also a little known thing about overtime. People making over a certain amount of money are not eligible for overtime, and that amount of money hasn't gone up in decades. It's stayed low. We need more people making overtime. I also think that stock buybacks are one huge way that you're putting money in the hands of investors and shareholders and taking it away from workers. And I still stand by my support for the Build Back Better plan. The idea of giving working people better access to education, healthcare, childcare, early childhood development, and in exchange, making sure that the top part of the top income earners and the big corporations pay their fair share in taxes, and that we get the price of prescription drugs under control. I think that's a good idea that can get after that economic inequality that is such a huge problem. Whole bunch of other ideas. Certainly, there's a whole bunch of things going on around immigration we should talk about. But I just want to hit on three quick things and then turn it over to you. One, March 14th is the date when funding for fiscal year 25 runs out. We passed a continuing resolution in December that took us to March 14th. So we need to pass a budget for FY25. We are now just about 5 months into FY25, and we're still operating on a continuing resolution instead of actually passing appropriations bills. We need to pass those appropriations bills so that our government is adequately and consistently funded. And that fight will play out. Right now, what I am pushing for is to set the top lines, the amount of money to be spent in all the different areas of the discretionary budget, and pass the appropriations bills. And I will continue to advocate for that. This coming week, we are going to vote on a budget resolution, the Republican budget resolution. And that is, second to last point that I'll make. So a lot of the talk about all these firings of government employees is also not just around government efficiency and effectiveness, but it's about fiscal responsibility, right? It's about the notion that the debt and the deficit are out of control and we need to rein them in. And I actually agree with that. I was very proud to be a member of Congress who back in the late 90s voted for 4 consecutive balanced budgets. We actually had a surplus for 4 years after we passed, I forget what they called it, the budget, the Balanced Budget Act, I think. Whatever it was, it got us a balanced budget. And now we're in a very bad situation. And you will hear a lot of Republicans defending what Elon Musk is doing with the Doge because we have to be fiscally responsible. But the budget resolution that they're about to vote for adds several $1 trillion to the deficit by cutting taxes, once again, primarily for the wealthy and big corporations. What they're going to vote on will actually increase the debt and deficit for the next decade. And to the extent that they pay that down by cutting Medicaid, programs for the poor and working people across this country, when, as I said, economically, those are the people who have been most disadvantaged by the way our economy has gone in the last 50 years. So I urge all of you, push as hard as possible to oppose that budget resolution. We don't need to drive up the debt, give more tax breaks to the wealthy, and devastate programs that are important for the working poor. Last point is, I know there's been a lot of talk about the negotiations around Ukraine. It is deeply disturbing what Donald Trump is saying publicly. And don't misunderstand me, it is not disturbing that he is interested in negotiating a peaceful resolution. That needs to happen, all right? The war in Ukraine is devastating. Most devastating, of course, for the Ukrainian people. I was just out at a rally in Seattle about an hour and a half ago speaking with a large group of them. It's also devastating for the world. It has disrupted many things and caused many problems. We need to bring an end to it. But Trump coming out and publicly siding with Putin is not going to bring an end to the war. It is just going to give Putin encouragement to keep the war going. I've said this many times, and I'll say it many more. The key to stopping the war is long-term security guarantees for Ukraine. If Putin knows that the coalition supporting Ukraine will not back down, and therefore he can't achieve his objective of taking over all of Ukraine, he will be forced to negotiate. But when President Trump comes out and says, he's not going to support Ukraine, he takes Putin's side, claiming illogically that Ukraine started the war and buying into Putin's talking points, all that does is encourages Putin to keep fighting. So I think we need to stand with Ukraine. It's a sovereign democratic nation. We've pledged support to them. That support has been crucial in allowing them to survive. Now I think it's going to be crucial in forcing Putin to the table so that we can actually get a peaceful resolution to the conflict. I could literally talk for another hour plus about all the things that are going on, but I want to try to address your concerns, questions you have about, what's going on out there and, what we're doing to try to, stop some of the worst aspects of what Trump is doing. Or if you support it, I'm happy to hear that argument too. I don't agree with it, but I think it's always good to have a debate, have an argument, and have a discussion about where we can get to the right set of policies to truly help people. So I'll turn it back over to the moderator, and I'll take your questions and comments.
Thank you, Congressman. With so much to talk about tonight, we'll go ahead and move forward with our first caller. Our first caller is Chris from Seattle. Chris, you're live on the call. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering what you're willing to do to stop Trump. I honestly think what we are falling into is an authoritarian takeover. I mean, we have an individual who obviously is firing many people in the government and laying off and creating confusion. He's replacing generals in the army and is removing independent general counsel and such. I feel it's a sort of all hands on deck moment, and I wonder what you're going to do to stop that.
Yeah, that was the opening 5 minutes of my remarks, and I completely agree with your assessment. I have said publicly that I feel this is an authoritarian takeover of our government. Even, as I like to say, I use the F word, fascism. That seems to be what Trump is bent on doing. What we can do, the options that are out there, number one, I think the lawsuits matter. They have slowed it down. They have brought attention to some of the extreme steps that are being taken. Number two, get out there aggressively. And I am out there every single day. It's my second town hall of the week. I was on Fox News yesterday, King 5 this morning. I post videos every day calling out all of that to try to build support for people. And I think you have to make two arguments. One is the argument, this is authoritarianism. I think more people care about that than people think. I think we should call this exactly what it is. We shouldn't shy away from saying that Trump is moving in a fascist direction and we need to stop him, and we need to make that case to the American people. I was in the New York Times yesterday talking about the firing of C.Q. Brown and why this is exactly the type of thing that authoritarians do. You have to make that case. Second, we also have to appeal to people beyond just the authoritarian argument. People will also resonate with how it impacts them individually, which is why I make the point about firing FAA employees and how that makes life more dangerous, firing people who are supposed to protect our nuclear weapons. And also, things like proposing massive cuts to Medicaid, shutting down programs, Head Start programs that are providing health care, cancer research. They're firing people for that. And people are beginning to respond to those sorts of messages. So you have to be out there every single day driving that message. And that's what I'm doing. I haven't been this aggressive driving a message, I think, in my entire career, because I understand exactly how important it is. Now, I also think the other part of it is to let people know that there's a reasonable alternative. And I think part of the reason that Trump wound up in office is because Democrats failed on a number of policies. I think we failed on immigration policy. I think we failed on the economic argument's a little bit more complicated. But we have to tell people that we've heard them, there is a better alternative, and make that case. And I'm also putting pressure on all kinds of different people in leadership to do the same. And we've begun to see that. I think we need to draw attention to the devastating impact of what Trump is doing, number one, and number two, to the authoritarian impulses that are behind it at every opportunity. And that's what I'm prepared to do and what I'm going to keep doing.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move to an online question submitted by Bill from Washington. Bill asks, what can Congress do to save USAID from total destruction?
Yeah, that's one of the more devastating ones. And I know, if you look at polling, people don't care about foreign aid. Well, I think people do care about foreign aid. And we actually built up a very strong bipartisan consensus. I'm actually the co-chair of the Caucus for Effective Foreign Assistance. And I've had a Republican co-chair on that for the, 15, 16 years that the caucus has been around. And we've expanded a lot of foreign aid. George W. Bush created PEPFAR, which has had an enormous impact on reducing the spread of AIDS in Africa and globally. He also created the Millennium Challenge Corporations, which are about helping countries build up better governance structures and aid structures. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk have come in and just shut it down. And that's illegal, all right? So we filed the lawsuit, and we are pushing to get that opened back up. But in the short term, Donald Trump has shut it down, and we have to put pressure on him to open it back up and talk about why it's important. I think people don't understand that foreign aid also benefits us. Disease spreads, and efforts that we've used to help contain diseases like AIDS, various different viruses. I'm spacing on it. I can't remember the name of there's a variety of different things that have spread throughout Africa and elsewhere. Those diseases can spread all over the world if we don't contain them. Polio, that's what I was trying to think of. Helping to eradicate polio protects us. We now have measles outbreaks here in the US. So efforts to contain that will matter. It also matters in terms of peace and stability. It is a major contributing factor to terrorism and global conflict if people don't have enough to eat and don't have any opportunity. And then you also have the economic reality. It's a global economy. We want US companies to have access to markets. Well, if they don't have any money, they can't buy anything. So there are arguments as to why it's important to us. I also think there's a moral argument. We are the most powerful, richest nation in the world. It's the Christian tradition, help thy neighbor. Well, who is your neighbor? Your neighbor is whoever you can help. And we should do that. So we need to make that case and push back.
Thank you, Congressman. As a reminder to everyone joining the call, if you would like to ask a question live, please press star 3 at any time. And if you would like to sign up for the Congressman's e-newsletter, you could do that by pressing star 6 at any time during the call. Our next question comes from McKenna in Renton. McKenna, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question. McKenna, you're live with the Congressman. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, hi. I'm so sorry. It cut out. My question
no problem.
is, first of all, thank you for everything that you're doing and saying. And I would just like to know if you would describe yourself as progressive, and do you believe that the Democratic Party needs to transform the way that they do politics and their messaging to the American people? And if so, I would like to know what is the message that you are putting out to Congress to bring the party together and have them stand up against this authoritarian takeover? And on that note,
Yeah.
I would also like to know if you agree with recent messaging on media from fellow congresspersons such as like AOC, Jasmine Crockett, and like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Labels are tough. I consider myself to be a progressive, but progressive means different things to different people. So I try to talk more about the specific issues. And I will say this, I think the cornerstone of the progressive message that I agree with is, what do progressives believe in? Well, we believe in the power and the necessity of collective action to help people. Whether that's government or various different charitable organizations, we need to make sure that people have adequate access to education and healthcare and childcare, transportation systems, and to build a strong society to help people. But I think one of the things that has been missing, and one of the things that is concerning me about the modern progressive message, I think personal responsibility and hard work need to be part of that message too. I think if we send a message out to the American people that we as progressives believe that everybody is entitled to everything and nobody has any responsibility, then a lot of working people are going to say, well, I'm working hard, I'm paying taxes, I'm taking everything, and you're telling me that I owe it to everybody else to pay for them regardless of whether or not they do anything? I think we should talk about personal responsibility and hard work. Now, I'm in favor of a robust social welfare state. I want to help put people in the best possible position to succeed. But I think a lot of the messaging that I've seen around these programs, well, the frame that progressives like to use, which I don't agree with, which is housing is a human right, healthcare is a human right, everything is a human right. Okay. And I get that. We want to try to spread that and make that available, but it also implies that you owe people a living regardless of what they do. I think we should have a balanced approach here. Let's help people, but let's not be afraid of talking about how important personal responsibility and hard work is. I don't see why we can't do both. I supported the Build Back Better plan. Okay. I support a incredible expansion of the social welfare state so that people can have better access to these things. But I think when we're trying to appeal to working people, If the message is there's no personal responsibility and there's no hard work element to it, I don't think that message resonates as well. So I think we got to do both. And I think we've made some mistakes in some of that messaging, some of our messaging on immigration. I mean, the message on, abolish ICE, which left the impression that progressives don't support immigration enforcement. I'm a robust supporter of immigration. I think we need more. I think we need a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented population in this country. I don't want the impression to be that I don't support any immigration enforcement. The whole defund the police movement, that language didn't help. I want police reform. I want alternatives to incarceration, but I also want to hold people accountable for the crimes that they commit while we help them to not commit them again. So one of my frustrations in the last few years is I've tried to work with a variety of different progressive people on how can we change some of those languages and those policies to, I think, present a better message to the American people. There's not a ton of flexibility there. I think it's part of what's hurting us. I mean, the overarching issue that is hurting all of us is the economic issue, no doubt about it. The fact that the economic policies that were adopted by both Republicans and Democrats over the course of the last 30 years left too many people behind. And it's a core progressive message, and we got to drive it home. But if we work on those other aspects of it, I think that helps make it appeal to a broader range of people.
Great. Thank you for that, Congressman. Our next caller is Leah, who joins us from Federal Way. Leah, you're live on the call with the Congressman.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. And I want to thank you, Congressman, for everything that you're doing. You're working very hard, and we all appreciate that. My question is, are you seeing any significant pushback from the Republican Party on these executive orders that Trump is signing like lightning speed? Are they doing anything? Are you seeing any kind of light at the end of the tunnel with the Republican Party?
Not yet. Now, just in the last week, as we begin to see some of the pushback against this, you're starting to see at least some evidence of a little bit of nervousness, but nothing public. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my career in politics. I mean, the Republican Party, whatever Trump says, they just do it. I mean, Joni Ernst voting for Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. I know that's not what she wanted to do, but they started running ads against her in Iowa and threatening a primary. So right now, Republicans are primarily afraid of Trump, and they don't want any daylight. And that's why they've approved all of his nominees. That's why they've not said anything critical about these executive orders. But that is beginning to shift in terms of where the pressure points are. The way I would put it is, right now they're afraid of Trump. We need to make them afraid of their constituents. And the Medicaid thing is a big, huge possibility on that. I mean, red states tend to be poorer and they get more Medicaid funding. So you're going to cut Medicaid by $900 billion. Something like 40% of the population in Louisiana gets Medicaid. Once it starts impacting their constituents, even some of the parks that wound up getting shut down across the country because of the firings that Elon Musk did had a little bit of a blowback. Head Start programs that are crucial in poorer communities that are beginning to be jeopardized. Cancer research. Well, guess what? Republicans catch cancer too, and sadly, so do their kids. And now we're dialing back on that research. It is beginning to impact the constituents of Republican members of Congress. And when they feel that pressure from their constituents, that can begin to be a counterweight to the fear that they have of Trump. Look, I mean, Trump has got a huge cult of personality going on right now. Whatever he says, they just sort of sign up for. So it's going to take a ton of work. And again, that's why I'm messaging as aggressively as I can in every possible forum about how this is impacting the people of this country. I mean, if Republicans have decided that they don't care about democracy, and frankly, after January 6th, the fact that they weren't willing to impeach Donald Trump showed me that they really don't care that much about democracy. Let's try to get them to care about their constituents suffering, about the programs being cut off and the impact on the real lives of the people they represent. Right now, it's not where it needs to be. As I mentioned, I've talked with a lot of my Republican colleagues who expressed concerns about all of this stuff privately. They're not willing to go public. We got to put the pressure on them to make them go public.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move on now to a question that comes in from Facebook. Crystal, who's a longtime federal employee, asks, what is Congress planning to do to end the barrage of harassment being waged against the federal workforce by Doge and Elon Musk?
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's the point that I really want people to understand here. It really offends me when people say, well, gosh, shouldn't the federal government be more efficient and more effective? Yes, it should be. What Elon Musk is doing has literally nothing to do with that. He is trying to terrorize the federal workforce into subservience and to weaken them so that he and Trump can have greater control. That's what he's trying to do. It's not about efficiency or effectiveness. I mean, my goodness, he shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, something that was set up after the economic catastrophe of 2008 to try to better regulate financial actors so that they don't collapse our economy again. Shut it down because they want freedom of movement, not because they want an efficient or effective government. Now, what can we do about this? Again, I keep coming back to the two basic things. One, they are violating all manner of different employment law in terms of how they're treating their employees and firing them and shutting down programs. I mean, my goodness, when they shut down USAID, they abandoned thousands of USAID employees all around the world. They're out there doing a job that they were sent to do by the federal government. It gets pulled out from under them illegally, and then they're just stranded. So lawsuits are being filed, and they need to continue to be filed because they are violating basic employment law, and they are violating the right of Congress to control the purse. So that is pressure that can be put on them. And then again, we need to show the impact that this has on our constituents. If you're trying to get Medicare benefits, if you're trying to get Social Security benefits, who's going to be there to answer the phone and help you work through that as they're randomly firing people all across the board? So we have got to begin to get members of Congress, Republicans in particular, to see the impact this is having on their constituents. And then we need to continue to aggressively file those lawsuits and all kinds of complicated legalities about who has standing to file a lawsuit. But we need to file them to protect the law and to protect the workforce. Look, I mean, the federal workforce actually in the US does an amazing job for us in 1,000 different areas. We need to understand that and respect that and understand that what Musk is doing right now is simply trying to terrorize that workforce, as I said, to terrorize them into subservience. That's not legal. So we're going to pursue it in court. We are pursuing it in court, I should say.
Thank you, sir. Before we move on to our next question, I would just like to kindly remind everyone that if you would like to ask a question live, please press *3 now. If you would like to join the Congressman's e-newsletter, you can press *6 at any time during the call. Our next question comes from David, who calls in from Kent. David, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Congressman. I have heard that Elon Musk has gotten into various financial payment systems in the federal government, may have gotten hold of a lot of people's Social Security numbers. And my question is, and just this year alone, I paid close to $4,000 out of my paycheck for Social Security. Should I be concerned that that money or my private information is being tampered with by Elon Musk and his crew at Doge? Thank you.
Yes, you should be concerned. I mean, the other deeply troubling, well, one other deeply troubling aspect of this is so many people are being given access to sensitive information, Musk and the Doge team, without any security clearances. And Musk in particular has all manner of different conflicts of interest given the different businesses that he runs. So yeah, there's considerable concern about Musk having access to sensitive health records, sensitive tax records, Social Security numbers, and all of that. What's he going to do with it, first of all? But second of all, is he going to protect it? I mean, once he gets access to this, is he going to leave it in vulnerable places? And this is another big problem with the way Donald Trump governs. You know, he basically doesn't believe in the concept of classified information. If he wants to throw it out there, he'll throw it out there. And he's done that on a number of occasions. So yes, I think this is another concern that needs to be expressed. And a lot of my Republican colleagues will talk a lot about privacy. And you know, the reach of government shouldn't be able to reach into private people's lives. But here you have Musk and his Doge team unchecked, not secure at all, being given access to this incredibly sensitive information. So yes, I'm concerned about it, and I think everyone should be concerned about it.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next call comes from Susie in Seattle. Susie, you're live with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question. Susie, you're live with the Congressman. All right, it looks like we may have lost Susie, but I do have her question here. I'll go ahead and ask for her on her behalf. Her question is, how do we talk to Fox viewers who don't have the same information that we get, especially on things such as climate change and wealth concentration?
Yeah, that's an outstanding question. I was actually on Fox News yesterday morning, and I go on regularly. And this sort of leads back to the question that someone asked a couple questions ago about, am I a progressive and do I believe in these things? Do I think that these, the AOC and others are effective messengers? Look, I think one of the big challenges is the left side of the political spectrum needs to do a better job of messaging and be more inclusive in how they do it. I mean, a lot of our messaging on climate change, for instance, is to try to establish moral superiority and then shame people into agreeing with us. And I've seen it. I mean, people get yelled at for even asking a question. All right. I think we have to be willing to make the argument and work with people, not just say, oh, you're a climate denier, I'm not going to listen to you. And I've had these conversations. If you're going to persuade people, you need to listen and understand. And also, we're occasionally wrong in some of the facts that we put out there. This was the whole science battle over, COVID and what was right and what was wrong. And a lot of what Trump put out there was ridiculous. But we made mistakes too. I mean, were masks effective? We started out saying they weren't, and then we said they were, and now we're not sure. Let's be honest with people. And I think you have to bring people in and make reasonable arguments. Too often I see when people are making political arguments, they start from the premise that there's no possibility that anybody could disagree with them, and now they just need to browbeat them into coming across. You need to listen. You need to be balanced and understand that we don't have perfect information. We're trying to reason together to get there. Now, I've said a number of times on this call that I think Trump is an authoritarian, that he is basically bent on a fascist takeover of the United States of America. And I believe that. I do not believe that all of his supporters are that. Some, yes, but not all of them. They have different concerns and legitimate concerns about the way things were handled. Personally, I think we kept kids out of school and out of activities during COVID way too long in places like our state. That had a devastating impact on young people. And we ought to be willing to admit it and have that conversation about what we got wrong. Bring people in. Don't try to browbeat them into submission so that they have to agree with you. And then the way we police language. We come up with a different way to refer to people every other day. And if someone uses the wrong word, we treat them like they're the worst type of racist in the world. That's not inclusive. Okay. You got to understand your audience. I was talking with a staff member of mine the other day. Whenever I'm trying to persuade people of things, I spend a lot of time thinking about where does that person or that group of people, where are they coming from? And then I tried to persuade them within their frame, okay, within their way of looking at the world. And that's how you grow the base of support. And also, like I said, a tiny little bit of humility. We're not necessarily right about everything. Let's listen and show that we can learn occasionally. And I think that way we can expand it. I've noticed, and certainly, and let me just say, and I know there's a lot of people on the left side of the political spectrum who are listening to this probably vaguely appalled. The right side, I mean, Trump and his people, they do the same thing. They're constantly berating him. I mean, my gosh, try disagreeing with Elon Musk. He'll accuse you of being corrupt and worse in the blink of an eye just because you disagree with him. The far right certainly does that in a brutal way. But I've encountered it around here on the left. we need to be more inclusive and bring more people in. Something that I have done since the election is I have been somewhat critical of some policies that the Democrats adopted and the far left did on immigration. We did not do a very effective job of securing the border. And acting like we did is not going to go over well with a lot of those people that we need to persuade. Now, I think you can do a very pro-immigration message, which I did just a few minutes ago, but also be honest about the fact that we do need a secure border and we need to enforce immigration laws. Okay? There are better ways to make those arguments to expand the base, because this is one of the big problems. All right. I represent a 70% Democratic district. All right. Solid Democratic district, a whole bunch of arguments we can get away with here, no problem. What's going to persuade people in Iowa and Ohio and Florida? How do we broaden that base? I think focusing on economics is a big part of it, that basic economic message I had. But we also have to address the concerns that those people have in the swing districts with the, what is perceived as the cultural elitism of the left. How do we better address a broader audience of people? So one of the best things is let's listen a little bit, see where they're coming from, which again is why I go on Fox News. I have a weird connection to Jordan Peterson. I went on his podcast. I don't agree with what he has to say, but I want to be in that space to be making a reasonable argument. I think we have become too insular. We need to be more inclusive to broaden our base and work with a broader group of people to stop what I think is the incredible, to stop Trump and his MAGA movement, which I think is really, really dangerous in the direction they're taking it. We need more supporters.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move back to taking a question from Facebook. This question comes from Ruth, who writes, there are already downstream impacts of canceling Congress-approved items such as IRA funding, firing thousands of employees from the Department of Energy, the USDA, the EPA, etc., and stripping programs. How and how fast can these lawless executive orders be countered?
Yeah. Pretty fast up front. Lawsuits were filed very quickly, and the Trump administration was blocked from cutting off those funds. In some instances, they've also been blocked from some of the people they want to fire. Now, part of the problem is the Trump administration is not following those court orders. Just so everybody knows, the stated excuse from the Trump administration is, well, gosh, it's really complicated to turn all of those programs back on. We're not ignoring you. We're working on it. I'm not sure I believe them on that. But they are turning back on some of the programs. I've talked with a number of different agencies who had like a 24, 48-hour period where, oh my goodness, we don't have access to these funds. There was a fund for wildfire prevention here in the state of Washington that was shut off for about a week before it was turned back on. There were a number of Head Start programs that I think was about 48 hours. All right. So some of that stuff is getting turned back on as a result of lawsuits, but also attention. I keep mentioning the firing of those 300 people at the NNSA. I always forget exactly what the NNSA stands for, but it's the people who protect all of our aspects of our nuclear enterprise, where they fired 300 people. There was no lawsuit. People just said, hey, these people are responsible for making sure that nuclear weapons don't get out of control. And they're like, ugh. So they're hiring them back. So lawsuits and public pressure can and has turned some of that stuff back on. And then you have to keep that pressure up. So like I said, members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican, feel, wow, this is not what my constituents want. When it comes, when we're dealing with the budget, when we're talking to Trump, we need to advocate for getting these programs going again. That's the pattern. Now, I will close with, the note, Donald Trump's president. The executive has an enormous amount of power, and that is frustrating and right now, I think, really dangerous. So I'm not going to promise you that somehow all of what I just said is going to stop him and turn everything back on like that. This is both a short-term fight and a long-term fight. which is why that messaging stuff that I went through a few minutes ago, I apologize, that was longer and a little bit more rambling than I normally like it to be. But my basic point is, if you don't believe in Trump, you don't believe in MAGA, you need to start thinking about how you can put a message out there that's going to persuade more people. Because I don't believe that all the people who voted for Trump are racists or idiots or any of that. They have legitimate concerns about a variety of different issues. We need to address those. We need to bring some of those people back across. So that's the short term and the long term. That's how I'm looking at it in order to make sure we preserve our democracy and we mitigate the damages of some of the most devastating program cuts and hopefully get us on a more long-term sustainable path to having a better governed country.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move to questions being called in. Our next question comes from Samantha, who joins us from Renton. Samantha, you're live with the Congressman.
Yes. I listened to your town hall on Thursday night as well, and I have quite a few talking points, but I think the thing that came to the front of the line for me was that as a moderate independent voter, I did vote for you. However, I felt incredibly alienated as a non-Democrat after that call. And I would like to have confidence that you really do want to represent everyone in your district. That is the biggest thing for me. And I do have a lot of other things. You know, I believe the government, I don't agree with how Trump is going about the layoffs, but hey, I'm held to waste, fraud, and abuse in my job, and why not the government as well? And I think our tax dollars need to be spent carefully. I think we need to put on our own oxygen masks first here in the United States. I think there's a lot of fear mongering. Even today, you're using a lot of adjectives that I think are making people fearful. You know, if we believe that the law and the Constitution will prevail, I don't think there's any reason to be so fearful. You know, and some of the things that you're talking about are things that we just dealt with here in Washington State from Jay Inslee. Yeah. And yet now that there's a Republican president,
please hold the line and feel free to interrupt me as I walk through this explanation, because there's several different points to it, and I think your call is incredibly important. It's something that I've wrestled with. Okay, my entire career, you know, I've always tried to be as inclusive as possible. I remember, you know, first year after I got elected to Congress, I knocked on a door when I was just going door to door. A woman answered the door and she said, "Oh, I supported Randy Tate." So I said, "Hey, that's fine. I still represent you. Okay, I'm not here to have you tell me, you know, what do you got? You know, I want to be as inclusive as possible. That's why I talk about going on Fox and talking about bringing all these other people in. And also, I really resonate with your last comment there about how, you know, if we're so concerned about autocracy and authoritarian regimes, you know, what's with all the language police? What happened during COVID in many instances? I mean, my son is a high school soccer player, all right, when COVID went down, and the way they shut them down for a year, and I know Jay, so I talked to him directly, and I talked to and it was really frustrating. Okay, you know, so I hear you, and I know there are many people in the center and on the right who are like, "Oh, you're complaining about authoritarianism? Well, you guys are just as bad." Now, I will tell you, I don't agree with that. I don't think we are just as bad. All right, but let me make two more points on this. One is to sort of let you know why I'm using the language that I'm using, which I do not use lightly, you know, and believe me, I know there are a lot of people in my party who do. Way back in 2017, everyone was like, Trump's not the legitimate president of the United States. I made a point of going, he's the legitimate president of the United States, okay? I'm not like that. I don't use this language unless I think it is important and apt. What I am seeing right now from the Trump administration, I mean, simply shutting, and you may well be right about, well, sorry, I disagree with you on foreign aid. I think foreign aid is kind of important, but I'm not unsympathetic to the argument that, well, shouldn't we, as you put it, do our own oxygen mask first. I have a long, complicated argument for why I think we can do a little bit of foreign aid, and it's not so bad. But no matter how you feel about that, they overrode the law to simply shut it all down, shut programs right in the middle. Okay, they have, fired all of these employees in violation of a wide range of employment contracts. He fired all of the inspector generals. He pardoned all the people who assaulted police officers on January 6th. He just fired an incredibly competent and capable chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The steps that are being taken here are unprecedented in our country. So I use that language about authoritarianism only because I believe that is what we are seeing. They're shutting down media outlets if they say things that are critical of Trump. I think there's plenty of cause to be concerned for that. Now, all of that said, I am concerned. If you're an independent, moderate person, I forget, Kent, Renton, where is it that you're calling from?
I'm in Renton.
Renton. Look, if you're around here, we're a one-party state around here. The Democrats are running everything. And in my opinion, they're not running it particularly well. I mean, for those of you listening on this call who are on the progressive side of the equation, consider just one of many examples, the Regional Homelessness Authority, okay, which I think makes sense to try to deal with the homelessness problem. But the way they hired people for that was based on identity and lived experience and not mixing that any at all with competence and capability. I would urge all of you to go on YouTube and find the video where the Regional Homeless Authority put a sex offender on the board, okay, which is probably alarming enough for most people. But they had an hour-plus long debate about this, in which the argument was, well, the sex offender represents a marginalized, vulnerable community whose voice must be heard. And then somebody else argued, well, wait a second, victims of sexual assault are a marginalized, victimized community whose voices must be heard. And this argument went on for an hour and a half. Nobody ever talked about, do any of these people know how to deal with homelessness, know how to manage a budget, know how to pick, a program lead, know how to implement a program. It was as if competency and actually caring about getting the job done was completely irrelevant. And I've had countless encounters like that as I've tried to figure out, how do we deal with drug abuse? How do we deal with the breakdown in our criminal justice system? We have alternatives to incarceration programs with no accountability, okay? No accountability, no transparency, no personal responsibility. Why can't we keep people out of jail and also say, you are responsible for your actions? Let's help you make better choices going forward. So I hear your frustrations as an independent voter. Believe me, I do. I do consider myself to be a progressive because, as I said, I believe in collective action helping people. But we've got to do better on the progressive side of the equation of actually delivering results instead of just policing language, all right? Let's improve the quality of life for people. So all that said, the reason I'm saying what I'm saying about Trump comes from the heart. This is not a political calculation on my part, all right? And I know the political calculation around here is, well, we're all Democrats and no one likes Trump, so if you just bash on Trump, you're pretty much golden as a politician. Not my calculation, all right? I'm perfectly willing to go after what Democrats need to do better. But hear me when I tell you, what Trump is doing right now from the White House should be alarming to anyone who believes in representative democracy, whether you're an independent Republican or a Democrat. And I'm just trying to get people to recognize that. And if you're on the Republican side of the aisle, say, hey, I'm conservative, but there's nothing conservative about firing people based on personal loyalty, public employee, and a whole host of other issues. So those are all the things that I'm trying to weave in here to make sure we get to the right answer. But I really appreciate that comment because I think the very important voice to hear in this discussion.
Thank you, Congressman. We have time for one more question. And our next question will come from Veronica in Seattle. Veronica, you're live on the call with the Congressman.
Hi, Congressman Adam Smith. Yes, I want to thank you for everything that you've been doing. And I've been listening to a lot of things here. So I just want to make a quick comment before I ask my question. I do feel like, okay, so I've been a former Republican for 32 years, and then I was a never Trumper, and now I'm a progressive Democrat. I've spent probably the past 5 years studying everything else and reading a lot of books and really searching for real information.
I lost you there.
Oh, sorry. I do
Okay, you're
agree
back.
that we are in the government takeover. Thank you. I don't know what parts you missed. I do agree that we are in a government takeover. I do agree that we are dealing with fascism. I don't agree with isolationism. It didn't work in our history. It won't work now. It makes us vulnerable. So I feel very strongly about what's happening right now. I feel also like as a U.S. Air Force veteran, as a Christian, as a Mexican American, like I'm feeling erased right now. What happened with the name change of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, with the banning of books, which are my history, it's very upsetting to me. And so I have been fighting this to educate people. And what I'm coming across and what I'm coming up against is the propaganda that is pushed on Fox viewers and TVN viewers, which were my parents, which were my family, which would rather believe the stuff that they're hearing there than, like, if I try to bring up any kind of facts, would say that's fake news. I would say even PBS is fake news. Yes, everything's fake news unless Trump says it's good news, right? So
Yeah.
this is, like, I feel like the messaging issue really wasn't on us, but a lot of those, what I see is Republicans control the narrative all the time. And so we're not being heard. I never believed in defunding the police. I never believed in abolishing ICE. What I wanted was immigration reform. I love immigrants. My father was a construction worker and a landscaper in Arizona and worked with immigrants my whole life. So I understand the value of immigrants. And so I just feel like the messaging that they push on us is what's really coming across to a lot of the, Republicans.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. If I might, we're up against the clock here. Did you have a specific question you want me to comment on the messaging piece?
I do. So I really want, I feel like everything I'm doing is just not working. I've been donating to everybody. I have been trying to reach congressmen. I write all the time. You've probably received a lot of my emails. I try to reach Republican congressmen. They don't take my messages. They send me some sort of message saying you're not a constituent of mine, so I don't need to listen to you. I'm trying to figure out, if there's a way that we can mobilize. I want to protest. I want to speak to these people. I want to show up where there's meetings where Republicans and Democrats can have conversations, because I lived 32 years as a Republican. I have a lot of insight into this life. So I want to know what.
All right. Well, let me try to
do?
address, because I think those two comments sort of cross over. It's what can the message be, and how can you influence things? First of all, there are a lot of organizations. I'm not going to recommend any here. There are a lot of national organizations, depending on who you're affiliated with, that drive messages out. I'll give you one good example. The people from an organization called Results, they advocate for foreign aid, and they are organized nationally. And yes, they have members here in my district and in the Seattle area, but they also have members in just about every congressional district in the country. And they take their constituents and they go talk to Republican members and Democratic members in every district they can and make their pitch. If you join an organization like Results, that is a national organization, you can get their messages and you can deliver the message. You can also be part of growing that organization that then does persuade people outside of your own zip code. But look, democracy is not a perfect thing. Everybody gets a voice, but you can't necessarily access and persuade everybody, but your voice does matter. I've always said that if you're going to be involved in politics and public policy, you have to be patient and persistent. Because, you've got 330 million people in the country. They have a voice too. So it's going to take time to persuade them. So be involved in organizations. Keep doing what you're doing. It really does make a difference. And it certainly would make a difference if you stopped, if those voices weren't being heard anymore. As far as messaging is concerned, yeah, I mean, Trump and the MAGA movement have gotten very good at sort of just silencing any sort of opposite voice, okay, with fake news, like you said, fake news. And I tell you, man, I've gone back and forth with so many people. I am not one to give up, in an argument, but it is exhausting at a certain point to try to walk through all the different pieces of it. But again, I will come back to something I said earlier. I think it's also important to listen, to get a little bit of an idea of where they're coming from, not just because, okay, well, maybe they'll persuade you of something, but then you understand how to put an argument that is within their frame of reference. Now, there are some people, I mean, the QAnon folks, I'm not within that frame of reference. There's just no way to get there. But I think the overwhelming majority of people in this country are still persuadable if you stick with it, you organize, and you make the arguments. I think also, and I'll close with this, something I've said a couple times already, I mean, have a little humility too. Don't come walking into an argument acting like they're always wrong and you're always right. People do respect when you show a little bit of humility, and they are more likely to listen to you. All of that said, yeah, sometimes you can't persuade everybody, but it makes more of a difference than you think. You got to keep at it. I mean, I happen to believe that this is, a great country. Representative democracy is a great form of government, and the basic idea that we need to create as much opportunity and inequality as possible in this country is worth fighting for. It is. It made my life a heck of a lot better. And I know it's made the lives of a whole lot of people in this country a lot better. So if we can keep at that basic effort, I think it's just really important that we do. And if we keep at it, I think we'll see more success than you might be feeling right now. I know this is a tough time, but you've got to plow through it, and keep moving. I've had many times in my life when I was in a very, very deep hole. And one thing I've always done is you just keep taking the next step, keep moving forward to try to get to the place where you want to be. And I think that's what we collectively have to do. These conversations are incredibly helpful for me. I mean, I learn from what people are saying, better ways to make the argument, issues that need to be focused on. So that's why I want to keep having them. So we'll keep doing these. I'm also going to do some live town halls. Live town halls are more difficult. It's harder for people to get to them. Also, increasingly these days, it's harder for them to be sort of a rational conversation. But I do think they're important. So I'm going to do those as well. But I'm going to keep doing the teletown halls on a consistent basis. And I urge everyone to join them when they can. And thank you for spending a little time today. I'll yield back to the moderator.
Thank you, Congressman, for your words and for hosting today's call. And thank you to everyone who joined us on today's call. If you would still like to subscribe to the Congressman's email updates, just stay on the line and you'll be able to leave a message with your email address so we can get you subscribed. Thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.